I'm here with Brad Anastasia. Brad, for people that don't know you, fellow jiu-jitsu black belt, real estate entrepreneur, multiple time author, male model. Am I missing anything, brother?
I think that about sums it up.
This is a treat because all the other ones were in person. You're in Washington now. So I'm really excited to talk about the new Arnold Netflix documentary because we both watched it and we were both Arnold fans, I think, growing up. We were in that generation. And there was so much wisdom in those couple of episodes that we both said, "Oh, did you watch it? There's so much more to talk about." And that's what we're going to base this on today.
Yeah, well, I can't thank you enough for recommending it. I actually wasn't going to watch it because I usually don't watch stuff like that. I mean, you and I have both read his autobiography, which is amazing. I think it's called Total Recall. And you actually recommended that as well. And I'd put that in the top 3 best biographies I've ever read in my life. It's so good. And just, I learned so much stuff about him I never knew. Like, I just always thought about the acting stuff and being governor. I never knew, like, he had a whole career even before any of that stuff, like with real estate. So it was just incredible. I couldn't have recommended it highly enough for everybody.
Yeah. So he was always one of my he was kind of a childhood, larger than lifetime figure. So childhood idol. But I really respected him as an adult because of exactly what you said. Most people don't know he became a millionaire in real estate investing before he ever made $1 million doing a movie. So he was this world champion bodybuilder. Then he was a real estate developer millionaire from that. Then he conquered the acting world, became the highest paid acting, actor and developed almost a whole genre around himself. And then he went into politics and became the governor of California. So I always think it's so hard to reach one mountaintop, and he legitimately reached 3 or 4 serious mountaintops, which is just so impressive.
So diverse too. Not even just like similar things, just couldn't be completely more different. So he's just an incredible human being, incredible story.
That's so true. Well, before we talk about how amazing it is, I have to say, and I've been getting my head around this. So I was so disappointed when COVID happened and he had that video where he said, "Fuck your freedoms, basically stay in." And of course, the different facts have come out. Things have changed now. A lot of people had the wrong opinions. We didn't know. But I just felt that young Arnold would have been so disappointed with him saying that, because young Arnold was always about bucking the trend and being his own man. And when he did that, I felt like he was such a sellout and I was so disappointed. And I've got this personality trait that I'm trying to work on where something like that will happen. I'll be like, fuck that guy. But the thing is, we shouldn't be judged. Like, you could judge me on my worst moment and I'll be a piece of shit too. Like, anyone can be judged on their worst moment. And I think that you need to be judged on the entirety of your body of work. And so I've come around to, I'm really glad I watched the documentary too, because I came around to how much I admire this guy. And yeah, he said something stupid when he was scared, whatever. A lot of people have said stupid things. So do you have any thoughts on that? Like judging people on their worst moments?
Yeah, that, but also with like the video said, I mean, I can't imagine if he was younger during COVID, during his bodybuilding days, that he would really stay home and not go to the gym.
Of course.
So yeah, obviously it matters what stage of life you're in for that. But actually you brought up a good point, and it's something I struggle with too, because it's like, I mean, people are complicated. You're never going to get like this one-dimensional person where it's just like, oh, all this person's good. And I think we won't have to go down this road, but just even politically like that, it's so relevant, because it's like you could take, I'll just say like somebody like Trump, who I never loved, but it's like, I could still look at what he's done and be like, well, he has done some good things. So it's like, no one's just like all bad or all good. Everybody's complicated. Everybody has multiple sides to them. So I just hate doing these blanket statements, because you do miss out. And like I said, it works the other way too. It's like, nobody's like an angel too. Mm-hmm. And just because if someone does have a fault, that doesn't negate the whole thing. So I think Arnold is like a perfect case study of that. And I'm sure the one part we'll get into later about like, obviously he's done things that have screwed up his public image, but that shouldn't take away, I think, from the bigger picture.
Yeah, I remember when Terminator 2 came out. I think I was about 10 years old. My brother was 12, my older brother, and he saw it 5 times at the movie theater. Absolutely loved it. Became a huge Arnold fan. Brought me along one of those times, and of course, I loved it too. I was a little young to get into it like him, but it changed his whole life. Like, he started bodybuilding, started lifting weights, focused on just working out and lifting weights for about 10 years after that, till he got some injuries. And he, through that, got me into fitness and health, and he'd always tell me, eat better, you should work out. And that was right when I was getting into watching Jean-Claude Van Damme movies, and I started martial arts. So it's all kind of linked, but I really think that movie kind of changed his life 100% and impacted mine massively just from one movie. It's pretty cool that I always say this, but life has to be lived forward, but it can only be understood looking back. And looking back, that movie was a pivotal time in both of our lives.
Yeah. And I think you just said it perfectly. It's always looking back. It's like between books, movies, really those two things. Like sometimes, at the time you're reading, like, wow, this is like really shifting my perspective on so many things in my life. But yeah, sometimes it is in retrospect, but there's so few far in between. But the ones that do have that effect are just like to be cherished. Like I maybe have like 5 or 6 books in my life that have like, these have been absolutely game changers. And movies the same way, maybe just a handful. And like I said, looking back, it's like, wow, that really just impacted everything I did since then. It made me a different person, or just made me look at life like a different way. And I could just count them like on my fingers, like the ones that have had that effect. So I'm glad that they came out with this docuseries for that, because it made you appreciate that. But yeah, I wish more things are like that. But it's so rare to have that much of an impact on you in your life.
Yeah. And I think when Arnold filmed Terminator 2, I think he was in his 40s, wasn't he?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Because he was in crazy, crazy good shape. And it was so cool because Linda Hamilton was jacked. And that was one of the first big time Hollywood actresses who was like really athletic and strong, and the character she played was really strong. So I just think it's so cool. They almost defined a genre for a generation of these like real athletic, strong actors and actresses. And now we've kind of gone the other way, where we've gone away from that a lot. I guess you still kind of have The Rock. I guess it's almost making a comeback. But for a while, I feel like we went from these jacked, larger than life male leads to more normal looking leads for a while.
Well, not only that, maybe it's because I'm older. I don't know if there's the same anticipation now with like younger people going to see a movie, but I'm just remembering like that moment in time, like especially it kind of coincided with Guns N' Roses coming out with like their double album, Use Your Illusion. And like, it was kind of the theme song of Terminator 2. And I was just like, the buildup for that movie was just so huge. Like everybody was talking about it. Like people couldn't wait for it to come out. Like it was like just the biggest thing. Like I said, maybe that happens now. I can't really relate to that. I don't really hear about it. Maybe for the Marvel movies that happens. I have no idea. But man, those just back in the day when they had those like big movie releases, that was like, there was just nothing like that. To be lines outside the movie theater to go. Like I was so nostalgic for that kind of stuff. But that's like one of the last movies I can remember that was like that.
Yeah, I think it is a different time because there's just too much. There's so many good shows. People are always like, oh, have you seen this show or that show? And then you'll start watching them. And there's so many shows that are really good, like well filmed, big budget, just amazing content. And, if you're busy and you have a life, there's no way you can even watch everything that's just on free streaming services. So I feel like it's just such a different business now, the whole industry. You don't, like you said, you don't have that huge anticipation, these huge events. It's just like, I'm scrolling through Netflix and there's a show that I love that has a new season of 12 episodes. I didn't even know about it,
Right. But that's why this documentary is so good, because it's like, it's like you're sitting back, you're learning something passively, but it's like, you could really take so many lessons from that whole series. So it's like, I'm watching something on Netflix, but I'm actually learning a lot. It could actually add to my life. So I personally, I love stuff like that. I mean, there's definitely times for like mindless entertainment. We do that ourselves as well. But this is like, man, I'm watching about somebody I really admire. I'm like learning all these lessons that I remember from his book. And I love kind of things that you learn about people's lives and like biopics like this. So I can't praise it enough.
One thing that really stuck to me was the idea of being authentic to you and creating a market for it, as opposed to trying to have no backbone and just be whatever the current trend is. And I think that was Steve Jobs' great. He basically redefined all these industries. He said, personal computers, I want to make them way better. The idea of a really good smartphone, the idea of digital music and iPods. Like he did so much he made things that people didn't even know they wanted. And then they were so awesome, they wanted it. And I felt like Arnold did the same thing, where there was a few people like Steve Reeves, not very many, like alpha male, jacked, larger than life role models in Hollywood. And he was like, I don't want to change my body for these roles. I want to make a genre for myself. And he largely did that. So I thought that was such a cool lesson. I think about the people that try to change themselves for social media marketing so that they hit the algorithms. And I can't do that. I just think that's so lame. And it's like you're going to cater your life to a fucking algorithm. I don't want to live like that. So that's such a good lesson for me. It's just be authentic to yourself and go after what you want, and just don't try and have no backbone and just whatever the current trend is, try and fit in with that. So I thought that was such a cool lesson, and it was so cool that he did that.
Yeah, I agree with that too. And then one thing I kept thinking about when he did that, I mean, I think you should do that anyway, regardless of your situation. But the fact that he had this other career even before any of that stuff and he had all this money, it's like he didn't have to take shitty roles. It's like he had money. It's like he didn't have to like beg for that kind of stuff. So I think about that a lot too. And like building up, have good financial security before you actually do the things you really want to do. So when you're doing the things you really want to do, to not have them so dependent on generating revenue. Because when you have to generate revenue, sometimes you make compromises or you have to give in from like what the vision you have for what you want to do. And it's just not as pure. So it's like he could just say, listen, I have the money. I don't have to take a shitty role. I'm just going to hold out for the best role because this is what I believe I can do. So I think that extra confidence, like having that financial security gives you, is huge. And it doesn't just apply to like what he did. It could apply to like anybody, but just having that, I'm not dependent on kissing up to anybody, like it's such a huge factor in when you're actually pursuing something you really love to do.
I'm so glad you said that, because that's exactly the way I look at money. I look at money as providing me freedom from doing things that I don't want to do. So whether that's selling your soul in some type of promotion or marketing, or like Paul Stallone had to do some like kind of weird like sex role movies when he was starting out because he was broke, that Arnold didn't have the financial pressure to do that. And it's the same with if you hate your job and you have an awful boss, but you have to do it for the paycheck to pay your bills for your family. That's a really tough spot to be in. So my focus has always been to make money, some people look at money as what can I buy with it, like material possessions, but I always think it gives you freedom from doing things you don't want to do with your life. I think that's the best use of money, and you hit the nail on the head.
Yeah, I think just aside, I think Rogan is like a perfect example of that too, because he had a lot of money from Fear Factor and like the other stuff he was doing. So it's like when he was doing his podcast, like he did not have to rely on like, I got to get sponsors. I got to kind of, maybe like get certain guests. So it's more attractive. He's just like, listen, I'm just going to do it my way. I don't need the money. And it's like just being so congruent and natural with like the way he wanted to do it is what made it the way it is today. You know what I'm saying? Like he did not manipulate it in any way to try to generate more fans or anything like that. He just did it his own way because he didn't have to rely on it for money. And I think that, like I said, that lesson applies in so many different aspects. So
yeah, I absolutely love that. There's one thing that for me really came across, and I've been thinking about this the last few years as well, as I went through my own kind of midlife crisis, where I felt like my athletic peak was when I was 35, I had my last MMA fight, and now I'm 44. And I'm not in horrible shape, but I'm not in that kind of condition that I was back then. And it kind of gets me down sometimes. I've got this inner battle with myself where I'm like, part of me is like, listen, you're growing old, age gracefully, accept it. That, I don't want to dye the gray hair in my beard. I want to age gracefully in some ways. But on the other side, I miss that energy that I used to have and the way you could push yourself and recover really quickly. And I thought about Arnold, and I think he said in there, I'm 75 years old now, and you kind of look in the mirror and you say, what the fuck? Because he used to be, Mr. Olympia. And obviously now he's 75 and he could be in a good shape for a 75-year-old, but he's nothing compared to what he used to look like. And I think everyone has to go through that. When I was younger, I thought it was only women who tended to be more depressed about their looks fading. But I've noticed that so many of my friends, just as vain as anyone else, like they're getting Botox injections, they're getting hair transplants, they're dying this, they're dying that. And it's such a weird thing, because if I'd asked my 25-year-old self, what are your goals in life? And then I looked at them, I think I've achieved way more than I ever hoped for when I was young. And I'm really proud of the things that I put my mind to, that I say I succeeded. But there's still there's something really romantic and exciting about being young and when you're 20 years old, you're single, you have no idea which direction your life's going to take you. You don't know if, at the time I was in England when I was 20, I had no idea I was going to work in 4 different countries, settled in the US, have the life that I had. You have no idea. So you have these unlimited opportunities and your potential is almost unlimited. But as you get older, just by definition of aging, you get more responsibilities, you get more tied down to locations, to jobs, to your skill set tends to get narrowed. So there's something I always find a little bit sad about, even if you fulfilled your potential more than you could ever dreamed of, there's something sad about that. And you could kind of see that with him. He didn't seem sad, but he kind of came across as missing his youth because he had such an amazing youth.
Yeah. Yeah. I have so many thoughts on that. One, you'd think with the things he's done in his life, like you said, he got to the mountaintop of 3 or 4 different completely different things. And it's like, it's incredible. Like the stuff they've done. So you think you're going to do this docuseries and it's just going to be like, I'm so happy with my life. Like I need nothing else. Like I'm just going to ride into the sunset. Like I've done all that can be done, but it really wasn't like that. And it kind of takes me back to like other conversations we've had on this podcast about like, is there enough you could do where it feels like that? Or is it always just going to be the constant striving? And if it's always going to be the constant striving, how do you offset that where you just kind of feel better about everything? Because then it's like you're never settled. It's like no matter what you do, you're kind of always going to have that uneasiness and like looking for the next goal. It's hard to know really what the sweet spot is, because it's like when you're younger, obviously it's amazing. You have such less responsibilities. It's like everything's in front of you. All the possibilities are there. That's amazing. But when you get older, you kind of understand more what you're doing. You're wiser. You can kind of see things. You know what you want. And there's definitely value in that. But you don't want to be too old, because then you, like you said, you have less energy and you can't enjoy things as much and you have way more responsibility. So there's probably some sweet spot in there. I don't know what exactly that is. I'm just trying to work on, as we age, because there's no stopping that. How do I just accept things, gracefully? And we've talked about this before, which is like, I like to look at it as like the concept of mini deaths. And there was one cool moment in the docuseries where, he's looking at his body. This is a guy who was Mr. Olympian. I mean, no one had a more like perfect body than that guy did. And he's just like, he's like kind of just not psyched about his own body and stuff. I mean, dude, 75. It's like, what do you expect? But there's going to come a time I'm going to look in the mirror and I'm going to think the same thing. I'm like, God, like I thought I was such an athlete for so long. And I was like, I don't even think I look great anymore. Or maybe we go to jiu-jitsu and I'm sparring and I'm just breathing heavy. And I'm like, what happened? Like I'm way past my athletic prime now. It's just, there might be no getting that back. And it's like, can I accept that gracefully? And it's just like, I haven't hit that point yet, but I know at some point it's coming. At some point that's going to happen. And it's like, I'm trying to just already prepare my mind for the fact that this is going to be one thing among many, that it's going to be just a mini death in my life. Like nothing is going to last forever. And that's just part of growing old, Yeah.
And I think it's extra tough for people that were in combat sports or jiu-jitsu because they're so physically taxing on your body. Whereas if we're obsessed with golf or a sport that you can do, it's a bit easier and you can do in your, much later years without too much wear and tear on your body. I think it will be a bit easier to accept. I think it's just so hard when you're like, I was rolling with this kid at Braulio's gym yesterday, and he could have been my son, and it's just thinking, Jesus, like I'm old. Like I haven't had that until more recently, where I'm on the mats and I'm around these young savages, and I'm like, I'm really feeling my age now. And you just see they're just limitless energy and aggression, and I'm just like, I don't have that anymore. The reason I come to the mat is to clear my mind, and I'm not, right now I'm semi-retired, so I'm not thinking about competing. It's such a different mindset, and seeing the young competitive savages go at it, it's just like, whoa, it's really stark to see that. Whereas if we were, say, obsessed with golf, and a lot of the guys on the golf course are in their 70s, would feel like young spry lions, so it really is. I think the environment definitely makes it tougher. The combat sports, fighting is a young man's game, so it's definitely highlights getting older. Whereas Arnold would probably look at us and be like, to be in my 40s again.
Right. But the weirdest thing is like, it's not like you wake up one day and it's different, right? It's like, it's this subtle change that's just happening very slowly over time. And maybe like at just one point, you just start to recognize it, but it's like, it was always happening the whole time, like slowly, subtly. You just didn't like fully like appreciate what was going on. And like you're describing being a Braulio's, I experienced this a couple months ago. I went to like some early morning open mat at our school. And there was like these young, tough blue belts. And I'm like, God, that was so hard. And I'm like, that's just like one little hint about what's coming. It's like, this is just a little preview. Like these young lions are going to really get the best of you at some point. Like I'm going to try to fight it as long as possible. But at some point, there's just going to be no competing with that anymore, So I'm trying to like accept it. But, when you have an ego, when you've been involved in it for so long, it's hard. And it's definitely not an easy thing to get used to.
So Brett, have you ever had any things in your life, any times in your life where you thought this might be it, I might die?
Yeah, nothing recently, but just like as a kid, like I almost drowned, like a few things like that. But yeah, not when I was older.
Okay. No, I've had that a few times where I'm not a scared flyer. I've traveled a lot, but there was one flight I was on where the turbulence was so bad. I remember thinking I could see one of these wings just breaking off and I'm going to die right now. And then you start having those thoughts. And another time was with a crazy ex-girlfriend in Brazil where she nearly killed me in a crazy driving like crazy when she was a little intoxicated, and long story. But those times when you actually think about, and they're very few and far between, but when you really have those moments and you think, okay, if this is it, am I going to be happy with my life? You know, what am I going to be upset that I didn't do? What am I proud of? If you had something like that happened to you right now, what do you think that you would say? Like, what do you think you'd be most proud of? And what regrets do you think you would have if that happened?
So I think for the most proud of is just like, there's been so many moments in my life, whether it's like, it's nothing compared to you, like having MMA fights and stuff like that, but even like jiu-jitsu tournaments, or like when I went to go live abroad and just left my job, things like that, where it's like, I know I was scared, like doing these things, and I still did them anyway. Cause I always had in the back of my mind, like, one, I never want to regret this. Two, and I want to have kids one day. I want them to look up to me, that knowing that I never let like fear get in the way of doing the stuff I really wanted to do. Like that lesson was like really, really important to me. So the things I felt like I took chances on, that I'm going to look back with the most like pride that I've done in my life. Regrets, like, of course, there's going to be stuff. I mean, in that same category, there's things that, you know, I could have taken more chances. Like I wish I would have known stuff earlier in my life, known somebody like you earlier in my life that could have pushed me to do even more things, like done fighting and things like that. Like it's hard to regret because I didn't have the info I needed at the time, but it's like, it's still things that, you know, I wish I would have done. But like, okay, so say I was on the same flight as you and that was happening. First of all, I would have had a heart attack, would have died anyway, because I'm so petrified of stuff like that when that happens on flights. But you know what's weird? I always think like, I'm like, it would just seem so silly to me that it's like, I had this life and I couldn't even like fulfill it and see really, not to say that there was any message at the end, but it's like, it's kind of cutting it short before I got to do all the stuff that I was planning on doing, or that I kind of figured everything out. So I'm just like, really, what was the point of that? I know that's not the best way to look at it, but I feel like I want to have everything kind of in place, which will probably never happen, to be like, okay, now if I died, it's like, it's okay. And I think you're in a much better position like that. I mean, you've had a kid, you know, you're happily married. So I don't know. How do you feel about it?
Yeah, I think there's the best antidote for regret of dying is living a fulfilled life, right? Fulfilling your potential in a sense. But like, I really like what you said about taking risks, because on paper, I've done a lot of cool things in my life that I could talk about at a dinner party or something, and it will sound impressive. But pretty much every single step of the way, there was a lot of fear. And I always feel like I faced my fear. Like a lot of people, I had so many people say things like, oh, it's easy for you, whatever it is, it's easy for you. And I think that's so hilarious, because everything is so hard for me. It's like I've never been a natural athlete. I remember every single boxing fight, every single MMA fight that day being like, what am I doing? I don't want to do this. I've got no problem with this guy. I don't want to fight this guy. This sucks. I'm not even getting paid, making much money from this. I'm doing this for love. Like, what is my problem? And I've had that same dialogue, so many different things I've done when I moved countries for work. When I worked one summer in Russia, I remember being on the flight to Russia thinking, what the hell am I doing? I'm going to Moscow. I'm, a young kid. I'm scared, but all of the time that I face my fears, I think it does something to you where you realize that fear isn't something to shy away from. If it's something that you're going to grow from. And I think that there's going to be no satisfaction if we had no fear and you walked into the Masters Worlds, you walked on the mat, no fear, smashed everyone, won. I don't even think that would be a good life. Like you wouldn't feel the same as when you have to battle the nervousness, battle the weight cut, battle the anxiety, battle some injuries, still make it there, force yourself to go, and then you come out on top. That feeling is so good. So I think anytime you look at someone that's doing something that you envy or that you'd like to do, don't ever think that it's easy. It's easier for them than it is for you. It might be a little bit, but in general, I think there's one thing that I've realized. I love this podcast for many reasons, but one thing that I've really got from it is a lot of different people, high achievers from different fields, they've talked about having to overcome that imposter syndrome. And I used to think that I didn't have it, and then looking back, I'm like, I realized I had it a lot of the steps of the way. But you get over it in different ways. So, for instance, when I was boxing and I was trying to win the Golden Gloves, I remember reading a book on mindset, and it said you get confidence, you get real confidence from performance. But when you start, how are you supposed to be a winner when you haven't won yet? And it's like, well, you just break it down. But start by, smashing your opponents in the gym, your training partners, and just performing well in the gym, and then take that mindset to the ring. And just, it's those little steps, but it's never been easy. And I think if there's one thing at the end of your life where you're not going to feel too much regret and you're going to be happy with what you've done, it's like you said, you faced you face a lot of fears and done things in an unusual way. And I think you and I can both be grateful that we've lived a I would say, an untraditional life path, right?
100%. And no one's better at that than you are. And the thing is, like, if you, like, the more you do it, that you put yourself in these situations where you know it's going to be scary and you're still going to go ahead and do it anyway. It becomes like, there's two different ways of interpreting that feeling. It's like, it's kind of the same feeling almost every time. It's like, holy shit, like, how am I going to do this? Like, this is crazy. Never done something like this before. I don't know how this is going to happen. But it's like, after enough times, you're just like, okay, I've been in a similar situation. The context is different, but it's like, I know this feeling of like, wow, this is kind of crazy. Like, I really do this. And it's like, I know I'm going to go ahead and do it anyway. And there's been so many times like you and I are chatting, you're telling me about this thing that's like really scaring you about what you're going to do, whether it's like moving to Indiana or starting a podcast, whatever it is. It's like, in my mind, I'm like, I know he's going to do it because I know there's been so many instances where it's like you have this thing in your head. It's like, I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I know I know he's going to do it. Like we talked before you went to Antarctica to run the marathon. You're like, dude, I do not know how I'm going to run this. And I'm like, I don't want to put pressure on you, but I know you're going to be fine because every time you say this, you always come through and do it. So, because you're so comfortable in that feeling, and you touched on it, but the fear is the tension, and you're never going to accomplish great things without that tension. So if you want to use an example of like jiu-jitsu, you compete, it's like you have to have the tension of like, I don't know how this is going to go. Will I be embarrassed? Will I lose? And it's like, that is not going to get released until you go ahead and do it. Because that's the only way it's going to feel significant to you. If it was just, if you knew you're going to win or like you crushed everybody every time, it's just, there's going to be, the tension's not going to be there. So you need that in any context of what something you need to be afraid of, that you're uncertain of how it's going to turn out. That's the only way you can gain and actually get something from it.
And I really like the idea of having some really devastating defeats and losses along the way in life and realizing life goes on. And I'll never forget my last MMA loss before I had a nice 3-fight win streak and retired. That last loss was the worst loss you can imagine. I was in a pair of Lycra shorts in front of all my coaches, my training partners, my ex-girlfriend, all my friends at the time. And I got caught by a very explosive guy with a head kick in the first few seconds of the match, like right when I was coming forward, and shin wrapped around the back of my head. I just dropped the floor, stopped it, and I lost a few seconds of memory. And I remember being like, what happened? And then my coach is telling me, and then I remember being in the back being like, so what happened? And then on the way home, Jay, our jiu-jitsu instructor, shout out to Jay, took me home. And I guess he was saying, I was a little worried about you. You kept asking me the same questions because I wasn't all there. And then I remember I went to my buddy, shout out to Eric Moon, my Indiana neighbor. I went to see him he was working the night shift as an ER doctor. And he did a brain scan. I was fine. I remember I went home, woke up the next day. So this is 3 months of putting my life on hold, 3 months of hard training. This was a guy that I think I could have beaten 7 times out of 10, but he was a very explosive athletic guy. And if he was going to catch me, it was going to be the way it went down. Worst case scenario happened. And I woke up the next day and my dog passed away, jumped on the bed. He's cuddling up to me. And I'm lying in bed. I'm thinking, if this is the worst that's happened in my life, I'm pretty lucky. Like I still have, I can still afford to eat food. I still have a shelter. I have roof over my head. I'm not, starving in the desert. I'm not in some village where I've got malaria and I'm dying. There's so many things that are worse in life, in the West, at least. I feel like a lot of our problems, we overinflate them. So when you have those defeats and you're like, life does go on, you just got to keep moving forward. That gives you more confidence to then in the future face fears and do things that, you might have failure and embarrassment, but it's like, I've been there before. It's okay. And another thing, there's that great quote where a lot of the pressure especially from sports, very few fighters ever worry about physical pain, even though, you can have some devastating things in fights that can take months and months to heal. You're going to be hurting for months, but we never worry about the pain. It's more the humiliation or the embarrassment, right? Because we put so much pressure on ourselves. But really, that phrase, when you're young, you worry about what people think about you. And then when you're older, you realize that no one's even thinking about you. I think there's so much truth to that. I feel so bad. I got a buddy who's he's getting some scans. He got some scans yesterday. He's getting the results on Monday. He's got some growths around his liver, and he was telling me about it, and I felt terrible. And then 2 hours later, I asked him for something, and then he's like, bro, I'm kind of dealing with something. And we worked together, but it was like, I was like, Jesus, in 2 hours, I forgot that devastating thing you're going through because I'm dealing with so much in my own mind. And I think that's like that for everybody. It's like we're all dealing with so much of our own lives, other people's, embarrassments or anything. Maybe you think about it for 2 minutes, but, life moves on. And I think it's so good to remember that we always put things in our head. Things seem so much worse in our head than in reality.
Oh, that is such a huge lesson. I think it's called like the spotlight effect or something. Like you think the spotlight's always on you and like everybody's thinking about you and like all these things you have in your head. Like, oh, I wonder what they're going to think. Like it's the complete, if you really knew, it would change the way you act so much. Like you would do so much more because, people just don't care either way. And then it's also in another aspect, it's like, and I think we've talked about this before, but it's like, oh, this person kind of screwed me over, or I'm waiting for them to apologize and all that stuff. It's like, they're not thinking that. Yeah. Like they're not, that's never coming. Okay. So if you're going to waste all your time thinking about like, oh, when they finally see, what they really did, like, then I'll be whole. It's like, you're wasting your time. It's like, you have to just inside your head, just accept that you're never going to get that apology. Most likely, it's just, that was a big rep for me because it's like, oh, if I'm not going to feel whole to get this. And it's like, no one's really thinking about you. It's like the people you're close with, obviously it's a different story, but it's like most people in general, they have their own stuff they're dealing with. So if you knew how much time you were wasting, not you specifically, but people in general on what other people are thinking about them, it'd be such a different story. And just the last thing on the fear thing, I just was thinking about, it's not only that you realize it's not the end of the world, like if you take a chance and it doesn't work out, but also, and this has happened so many times for like you and me, is something, scary we wind up doing anyway. Maybe it didn't work out the way we wanted to, but then it actually really motivates us to actually do that thing again. We're less afraid because we already just did it. We have more knowledge and we know now more to expect. And you're a perfect example about with that fight. I don't even know if you lost ever, even after that one fight. No. So it's just a big example of like, you did it and now it's like, okay, now I don't have that fear in the way as much anymore. So I'm really going to use that to motivate me. So that's another hidden aspect that people don't appreciate before they even start.
So Brad, talking about waiting for apologies. So Ryan's not going to apologize?
He's definitely not. So I wouldn't wait.
Oh, good times. Well, brother, last thing. I listened to Joey Diaz, the comedian's biography recently. And one thing really stuck out to me. And I'm a big fan of his comedy. He's just so over the top, and I find it hilarious. But he's had such an interesting life. He was in jail. He had a crazy youth, and the one thing that came across is he did bad things. But I always think he seems like a real, like he had a real good heart always. And even it's kind of weird saying this, but even when he was doing bad things like robbery and things like that, he almost tried to be a good person when he was doing them, in the sense that he was always very, very personable and nice to people along the way. And there were so many times where like he got out of things through his personality, meaning like there was a time where he would have got arrested and sent back to jail for something, but he had met the cop that was there a few years ago and they had shared some banter and the cop knew him and was like, hey, Joey, and just basically look the other way. And I think there was a few different instances like that where his personality got him out of things. And I think that's such that theme of, if you can't be, very funny, personable, charismatic, because not everyone can be, at least be nice, because the world is smaller than you think and things do come back. And I was at the gym yesterday, that Braulio's gym, because I moved to Indiana. My main gym is still in the city of Chicago, but I normally go Friday nights to his gym, to his open mat. And there was a guy there, one of his black belts. I competed against him when I was a blue belt and he was a white belt. And it was the first tournament I did in 2003, I think, or 2004. And so that was 20 years ago. And now we're teammates. And one of the other students there, we've competed against each other 3 or 4 times coming up. And now we're both black belts and we're teammates there at that gym. And it's like, if I had been an asshole back in the day, they wouldn't have been so accepting to me coming to their gym. And there's so many different times like that where being a good person is going to save you. And I've talked about it before, but when my old trading company had a bunch of layoffs, one of the traders that they kept was probably the least profitable trader, but he was a really funny, nice guy. And they honestly just liked having him around. And so he made the cut, whereas all these other guys that made more money didn't. And it's like, it's such an important lesson that no one will ever teach it. There's no MBA program that teaches you about being personable, being nice. And it's one thing I really like about you where, there's a lot of times you'll be in a situation around other people where someone's talking shit about someone and you always get uncomfy and you're just like, I don't, even if I don't like them, I don't really want to be talking shit about them. And that's one thing I really admire about you is you just don't like that. You just like, it's negative energy. I just don't want to deal with it. And I think that goes a long way, just being a good person in life.
I think that's such a huge lesson because I think so often people could think like, oh yeah, I could do this nice thing, but it's like, I don't see the direct benefit of if I'm nice, that I'm going to receive something in return. Like, it's just not obvious to me. So it's like, maybe I'm not really motivated to do it, but it's like, that's just not the way to look at it. Because like you said, you never know when this stuff is going to come around back to you. And it's just crazy how the universe works. Like, it almost always does in some way or another. You just don't know when. And the opposite is true too, right? Like you're just talking about, it's like maybe you screw somebody over, even if it's like a little thing, or just you talk shit. Maybe it's just not a big deal. You're just joking around with people, but somehow, some way that gets back to somebody. It's just like, you'd be so embarrassed, like if someone found out that way. So I think what you said, it's important to live your life like the way you're describing in the biography you read of Joey Diaz. It's like, listen, just be a good person. Doesn't matter who's watching. Doesn't matter if you see the immediate benefit or not. Just be that way. Be congruent. I think he's a perfect example of someone who's just congruent with themselves, good or bad. Okay. It's just like what you see is what you get. And I just think that authenticity is we're so attracted to that. Like, even if you're not just some big time person, like just be authentic at the very least. That'll at least you'll have a certain niche of people who like being around you. And it's like, though I think the worst thing, at least for me personally, that I don't like about people is just fakeness and being disingenuous. Because that's like, I don't know, that's why I turn up by like politics and stuff like that, because it's like, dude, it's just so fake. Like I just can't stand it. I'd rather have somebody who's genuine and no one even knows who they are. So, I mean, that's just my preference, but I think that just resonates with people so much more.
Yeah. Well, lastly, talking about fear and not letting fear stop you. I'm very proud of you. You're currently in DC, you're engaged, you love your life in Chicago, but you really want to follow your heart and have a family, and you're willing to sacrifice your life that you love in Chicago to move and pursue that. So I give you a lot of credit for that, because I know that couldn't have been easy, because I know you just, you love your condo, you love where you live, you love your jiu-jitsu gym, you love your social community, you love your friends here, you love everything about Chicago. And there's so many times in the past you'd say, I love Chicago, I'd never leave, I don't want to move anywhere else. And then you're really putting your life behind the things that you've talked about before, where you're like, I got to take the risk. I've got to follow my heart, because if you don't, you might regret it. And the worst thing that can happen is, and not to put it out there, but it doesn't work out, you'll never regret trying anything, but you might regret not trying, right? And I think so I'm really proud of you, because I know of all my friends, I think you moving has got to be one of the toughest decisions, just because you're such a creature of habit, creature of routine, and you love your routine that you have in Chicago. So I give you a lot of credit for that, for following your heart.
Thanks, brother. I appreciate it. But yeah, it does kind of echo the stuff we've been talking about. But like I said, if it doesn't work out, you could always move back. You'd always change stuff. But there's a lot of things that are scary to it, and moving to a new city and things like that, and starting over in a lot of ways. But yeah, in life, you got to go for it. You got to familiar with that feeling. So yeah, just like you throw your hat over the wall and you just go for it. So we'll see what happens. But I'm excited about, new chapter and yeah, so we'll see what happens.
You're the best, bro. I'll let you get back to I know you got a busy day. I've got about 50 Filipinos coming over. Jen's having a family party, so it's going to be a zoo. I better get ready to. Always appreciate talking to you, and you're such a kindred spirit. And I'm so glad we met 20 years ago where did we meet? Peru, or was it Argentina? Argentina, yeah. That was it. Yeah, Argentina. So I'm always so grateful, and it's so cool that we met in a different country. We both ended up moving to Chicago. I got you into jiu-jitsu. We're both black belts now. We competed together all over the world. It's really, really cool how life works.
Likewise, bro. It's been completely life-changing having met you. So I appreciate you and love you, buddy.